Hi everybody, and welcome to the first episode of Why Don't You Want My Stuff? I am so excited to be bringing you this video series that I'm filming here in North Phoenix in my living room because my wife and baby girl have just gone out of the house and it's now safe to record. I kicked the cat out, the cat's outside, so she won't be starring in this episode. That's Penelope Johnson, for those of you who need to know her name. She might be featured in a later episode because I find that she collects things like lizards and birds, etc. from the backyard. But anyway, this is about antiques and collectibles, what people collect, the psychology, and just recent trends in our industry. And funny enough, it's called Why Don't You Want My Stuff? I really like to get into the millennial mindset, the baby boomer that's downsizing, the Gen Xer that is starting to collect, and the greatest generation that were our best hoarders. Have you ever watched an episode of Hoarders? Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I was raised by hoarders. I was raised, I like to say, in a boarding kennel because my parents raised Newfoundlands, if you know what they are, but we not only had Newfoundlands, we had dogs that my father was boarding in the boarding kennel, and we at one point had about 5 Newfoundlands in the house, 19 cats, 2 parrots, a wild ferret that ran loose in the house. It wasn't your normal upbringing, but my parents loved antiques and collectibles as well. The reason I think my father got into it, one, he was this child of the Depression, and he believed he who dies with the most stuff wins. We had outbuildings, barns. You couldn't get in half of these buildings, and at one point I even had to climb in a window to when I came home from school because I couldn't get in the front door because they had bought so much stuff. From the outside looking in, you probably didn't know what we had going on in the house, but I really wanted to understand the psychology. Growing up in it, it's probably why I do what I do. I assist people downsizing and valuating their things and dealing with people's expectations of what values are, etc. I do appraisals. I've spoken at Fortune 500 companies. I do charity auctions. I really love the industry. Due to a recent setback in my business, setback isn't a horrible bankruptcy, I now have all the free time in the world to record vlogs. So that's what I'm gonna do now. And hopefully I'll be sponsored by Taco Bell and maybe Popeye's Chicken and the new sandwich, and maybe Skechers, I don't know, because I'm wearing them right now. So this episode was brought to you by Skechers and Taco Bell because I want some as soon as this is over. Anyway, I've told you a little bit about myself, but I'm sure I'll get into it. I talk way too much. I have my friendly timer next to me because I hear that you people out there can only stand about 15 minutes of us vloggers out here. So, you know, I joined the community now, so I'm really going to try to keep it to 15-minute segments, if not shorter. We shall see. Okay. Let's dive into, first I'm going to give you the mindset of the baby boomer right now. What's happened is the baby boomer just recently, let's say 5 years, 10 years ago, lost one of their parents or both their parents from the greatest generation. So what did they do? They were saddled with this enormous amount of stuff that they had to find homes for. In some cases, they took the stuff, they had it packed up, and they brought everything to their house and they became themselves curators of the hoard. Or they hired an auctioneer to sell everything in the house, and there were family squabbles and stress, and you had to take off from your job and deal with it, and it took months and months and months, and you just were overwhelmed by it. So here I am, the baby boomer, having just dealt with that. So what did you do? You said, I'm going to continue to coddle my Gen Xer and millennial children, and the way you do, you know who you are. And you said, I'm not gonna burden them with that, so I'm gonna downsize. And the biggest trend we're seeing right now is downsizers. And I totally get that. You don't wanna saddle your kids, so what you're doing, this is gonna ring true to so many of you. Hey, I got all this stuff, you know, and I want to start downsizing. Is there anything you would like? And your millennial Gen Xer child goes, no, Mom, I don't want any of that stuff. Hence, why don't you want my stuff? That's what we're going to be talking about over and over again. And why they don't want your stuff is a very interesting mindset. It's different for everyone. But I'm going to tell you some really interesting things I've learned in trying to get inside people's heads. And what I found out is they're not collectors yet. And I say yet, okay, because later in episodes I'm going to tell you, if you have even an inkling of being a collector and you're a millennial and you start collecting now, it's going to pay off in dividends years from now. And I'll get into that later. But let me explain. The millennial doesn't want your stuff right now. Why? Okay, let's go back to the greatest generation. They were 18 years old, they had children, and I'm painting with a broad brush. They were 18 or 22 or maybe 15 or 16. Anyway, they had their kids, and their kids left home when they were 18 or 22 if they went to college, etc., etc. They left home. So there you are in your 40s, and you now have an empty house and disposable income. So guess what happens to you? You become a collector. It's a dirty word, I know. You become a collector. So the wife, and again, I paint with a broad brush, might have empty nest syndrome and started to collect things. So she collected Hummels and Yadro figurines, and you had all these empty rooms now to decorate, and also you had disposable income to buy what you want. So what did the guys do? They bought the stuff they couldn't afford. They started collecting toys, and oh, I remember toy trains fondly. So I collected toy trains, and I collected slot cars, and they started collecting these things, the guy stuff, and the stuff they couldn't buy or treat themselves to because they had, a family to support, and now they had disposable income. So they became collectors. So about 20 years ago, these collectors started selling their collections, and there were people still buying them in that 17 to 20-year generational swing of the people just younger than them starting to collect. So it all made sense. So we're collectors, collectors, collectors. So what happens now? And this is the key. All right, so now you have these collections that you think fondly of, and it's time for you to sell them or dispose of them or give them to your kids, and your kids are millennials. Now let's talk about them. When did they have kids? They had kids, not yet. They're having kids later and later in life. Their kids are staying in the house. Us Gen Xers can speak to this. Your kids are staying with you until they're 26. And hey, it's because they're staying on our insurance. But anyway, they're staying at home, so they are not at that disposable income. Families gone. So here they are, they have young families, and you're saying, hi, do you want to collect this stuff? And they're going, I got 8 and 10-year-olds running around the house that are going to break stuff. And guess what? They're not leaving the house until they're 23, 24, 25 years old. And they're not at the point of their life where they're collectors yet. So we have this weird thing. Plus, throw in, the baby boomers are the largest generation to ever in the history of America go into retirement. So they're going, here's my stuff, and the millennials don't want it. So simple, supply and demand, this huge flood. And the industry tells us it's another 20 years of stuff that's getting laid upon a generation that doesn't want it. So that's why they don't want your stuff. Does it mean they don't want anything? No. But there's certain things, antiques. Let me also tell you about the psychology of that. Antique is now a dirty word. They teach us in the auction industry to not even use the word antique. We're supposed to say retro or vintage. Antique has some negative connotation that apparently came from the show Jackass. I don't know if that's true or not. I guess they would antique someone by putting baby powder, I hope it was baby powder, all over people and call them, you've been antiqued. So antiques have this negative connotation in this generation, which I don't understand, but I get it. So it's so hard for me not to use the word and say vintage and retro. I feel like a hipster doing that, and no one's ever accused me of being a hipster. But it's got to come out of our vernacular if we want people to collect it. I actually have, people are also sheep. They're told what to collect, they're told what to like, what the hottest new trends are. Supply and demand, as I was talking about earlier, demand is now all that matters. If there's a huge supply of something or there's none, it's super rare. I hear that all the time. I have this rare piece, I can't find another one. But if nobody wants it, it doesn't have any more value. So you have to get out of that mindset. And antique collectors, and I used to swear, I used to go to auctions when I was a little kid, and I would hear these auctioneers rant about, do you know what this used to sell for? You guys are missing the boat and all this stuff. And I swore I would never be that guy. And the first time I was on the auction block and I said it myself, I'm like, do you know what we used to get for these? I felt like the old man in somebody's yard yelling at them. So I love the psychology. I love understanding it. I love letting go of the past and the norms of what we thought were norm, because guess what? These trends have sped up so fast. What's hot today can be gone tomorrow through social media, through the media in general, and just change. It's like people want what they want. It's funny. I make a joke, and I'm dead serious. So Justin Bieber, if you're listening to me, or Kim Kardashian, I want you to do a study for me. And every time you do a vlog or do your podcast or whatever, I want you to either have behind you a Hummel figurine or a Yadro figurine, because I want to see if that influences the market. I truly believe it would. I really think if people started collecting, remember the elf in the shelf craze that came out? That was these little 1950s pixies. I used to see them at auctions all the time, made in Japan in the 50s and 60s. And all of a sudden they got really hot in one season. The price on them on eBay, where we were selling them for $8 and $10, all of a sudden became $50, $60. So it's just those little things can influence the market so much that I love the psychology of that, and I'd really like to know what it is. But like I had said before, and I will have a whole episode on it where I'm talking about if you do find yourself, being interested in collectibles and start collecting now, guaranteed, make sure it's something you like, because guess what? If you collect something and you get stuck with it because you didn't make any money on it, you're now a collector. You have these things in your house. But I want 20 years from now, these will still be antique. Oh, I used that dirty word. They'll still be vintage and retro and cool and collectible because they're not making any more of these. And that's another thing the psychology drives me crazy. People will pay for a reproduction more than they'll pay for the original today. And it's because it's new and clean and fresh. I saw it in lunchboxes. As the lunchbox craze died, they started making reproductions. That's another thing. They'll make a reproduction of something as soon as it gets hot. And it used to be, people were like, I want the original. We're even seeing it in classic cars, where people are building these kits. It's not an original car. These are like shop creations, and people at auction, just was recently at the last Barrett-Jackson, I heard the real musclehead car guys all complaining that people were buying rebuilt Mustangs and paying more for them than the originals that were, garage kept classics. But you know what? It's what people want. Why fight it? Don't fight the trends. That's all I'm going to say. I'm going to wrap up this first initial episode with a real example of what I'm talking about here. China. The first article I ever wrote for the Arizona Republic was about China. And it was funny for a couple of different reasons. It was one of the things I'd always hear. I'd go out on a call, a family would show me grandma's set of china, and they would say, I want to sell this set of china. They then told me what it was worth. They said, this is worth thousands of dollars. And can you believe it's been in my family for 3 generations and my daughter doesn't want it? And they were depressed about it. And I could really see the emotional, it hurt them that their child didn't want this family heirloom. And I wanted to know both sides. Why didn't they want this heirloom? And also, why was it not worth anything compared to what she thought? I was researching, and the set was worth about $300. She told me it was worth $2,500. And 10 years ago, she might have got $2,500 for it. Several reasons. One, how many people do you know that do the big Thanksgiving and big Christmas anymore? I know one person out there is going, oh, we still do. Well, guess what? Most of America is paper plates, or they order it from Costco and they have they just don't do the big, you can't put it in the dishwasher, that kind of thing. So these china sets, there's no demand. So again, supply and demand. But let's get into, why does your daughter not want it? Oh, by the way, so then when someone tells me they want to sell it, I say the problem is I'm trying to sell this set to your proverbial daughter. And what I mean by that is, if your daughter doesn't want your grandmother's set of china, why is someone else's granddaughter going to want a set of china when they don't even want their own that has this family story behind it? I found out some really interesting things there, and one of them was from an office manager I had. I had said, I was telling her the story about the article, and she said, oh yeah, I can't stand China. And I'm like, she had this visceral reaction about it, and I said, why don't you want your mother's china? And she goes, My mom, as a little girl, got to play with this china. She had tea parties with her dolls and all this. She fondly remembered it. Her grandmother would let her play with it. Well, when she inherited it, it went in the china cabinet. And in the china cabinet, as my office manager grew up, it was, don't touch that china set. Do you know how old that is? Do you know how valuable it is? It's your grandmother's. Don't chip it, don't play in this room, all this stuff. It was almost feared, and fear turned into resentment. They actually resent that set of china and don't want it. So if you like this episode or you think I'm a rambling idiot, I got more rambling coming up in future episodes. Thank you so much. This has been Why Don't You Want Your Stuff? And oh, for my plug, this is the book. You can buy it online. It's a great bathroom read. It's on Amazon. It's self-published, so that means I've sold about 150 copies and I've given away probably 1,000. So anyway, it's Why Don't You Want Your Stuff? I think it's an interesting read. I call it a bathroom read. You know what I mean by that. Take care, and I will see you soon.
Nigga wanna see me fall. Stephen Curry, how I ball. Gosha garments and a white 3